Dopo la crisi, continueremo con questo sistema economico di ingiustizia sociale e di disprezzo per la cura dell'ambiente creato dalla sacrificio. Dopo la crisi, continueremo con questo sistema economico di ingiustizia sociale e di disprezzo per la cura dell'ambiente.
Hi everyone, and welcome to a new OnLive webinar. My name is Loredana Bersampieri, and I'm part of the central staff of the Economy of Francesco. The title of today's webinar is How Do We Measure Poverty? And it will focus on extreme poverty as a multidimensional phenomenon. The Economy of Francesco is very proud to host the international movement ATD Fourth World for this event. It is a non-governmental organization, and its primary goal is to eradicate extreme poverty and exclusion around the world by involving the people who suffer from it. ATD Fourth World was founded back in 1957 by Father Joseph Brzezinski and families who lived in a camp for homeless people in the Paris region. The movement brings together activists with first-hand experience of poverty, members of an international volunteer corps, and supporters who take action together to foster long-lasting change in society. This movement is present in 33 countries all over the world on 5 continents, and it runs projects that promote family life, professional development, and social advocacy. And in the first part of this webinar today, we will welcome some opening remarks by Luigino Bruni, the Scientific Director of the Economy of Francesco and full Professor of Political Economy at LUMSA University, and Jean Tombelet, Permanent Volunteer of ATD Fourth World since 1977. He is Delegate for Italy in relations with the Holy See of ATD Fourth World, and he is also director of the Review Capmont. And I'm particularly grateful to Jean Tombelet for his efforts to ensure a successful webinar today. And then I will give the floor to our keynote. We are extremely pleased to have today an online conversation with Xavier Godinot, who is the research director of this international movement, ATD Fourth World. Our keynote, it has graduated from the Paris Institute of Political Studies and holds a PhD in economics. He has been a permanent volunteer in ATD since 1974, and he was also a delegate for international relations at the headquarters of the ATD Fourth World in France before becoming research director at ATD Fourth World, Joseph Brzezinski's Research Institute. He is currently carrying out international participatory research with Oxford University on determining the dimensions of poverty and how to measure them. In this project, people living in poverty are part of the national research teams in 6 countries, together with academics and practitioners. And then in the second part of the webinar, we will have a Q&A session. And so Dr. Godinot will engage in a dialogue with 2 young protagonists of the Economy of Francesco. We will have Marta Panceva, Assistant Professor of Economics from Sofia University, and Jean-Paul Yumo, Lecturer on the Economy, Society, and Sustainable Development from Manila University. And then at the end of this seminar, if there will be still time left, we of course will be very happy also to welcome questions coming from the audience following on YouTube. And now time has come to give the floor to Eugenio Bruni for some opening remarks. So Professor, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for for this beautiful chance to dialogue with the ATD Quarto Mondo. And I would like just to address very few words for, in order to express our joy, our satisfaction, our also proud for having ATD as a partner of our economy of Francesco. The first poverty of many people in poverty is language. Language is one of the forms of the poverty of people. First is a poverty in the narrative of poverty, because very often the way of in which people describe and express, narrate poverty is very poor, because there is a lack of competence, there is a lack of know-how of poverty, and then poverty, the first humiliation of poor people is the humiliation of words, is the humiliation of language. In particular, it's quite difficult to listen, even in the Catholic newspaper, in the Catholic narrative, even in encyclical of popes, to listen the idea that poverty is not always something bad and ugly. Poverty has its own beauty. Poverty has its own wealth. As you know, one of the most beautiful verses of Dante Divina Commedia in the Paradise, when he describes Francesco d'Assisi, he started, "O ignota ricchezza," or unknown wealth, for describing St. Francis. Then the idea that poverty is just something bad, something negative. Poverty, in particular in the biblical and in the Christian humanism, poverty is not an absolute evil. There are negative poverties, but there are also positive poverty. Poverty is a malediction, but poverty is also one of the most beautiful words of the gospel. Blessed are the poor. And then there are many people in the world that understood poverty in a more rich narrative. One is the economist, the Islamic economist Majid Ranema. He probably is also friend of the ATD movement, because he was living in France for many years. He's from Iran. Then when he described poverty, he wrote a very beautiful page when he said, there are many poverties. The one chosen by my mother and my Sufi grandmother, like the great poor of Persian mysticism. Then there are the poverty of some poor people in the neighborhood where I spent the first 12 years of my life. Third, there are women and men in a world in the process of modernization with insufficient income to follow the race for the needs created by society. And then there are the poverty linked to unbearable privations endured by a multitude of human beings reduced to humiliating forms of misery. And finally, the poverty represented by the moral misery of the property classes and some social environments in which I came across in the course of my career. Not all these poverties are bad. There are poverty. And then the title of this book of Ramena is quite telling to me. In français, in France, le titre è Quand la misère chasse la pauvreté. This is the issue, because sometimes la misère chasse la pauvreté. The misery drives out poverty, because when people live in conditions so negative, so bad, it's impossible to live the virtue of poverty. Then to fight misery is a way to live freely poverty, intended as a blessing. Then this is, I just final word, I had the chance, the grace, the providence to meet ATD in the person of Jean Tomblé a few years ago now, when he came to me in my office in Rome. And starting from now, from that moment, my understanding of poverty changed radically, because ATD has a real, authentic, true charisma for poverty. It's very difficult today to understand properly poverty without dialing and living with ATD. And then there is a sort of magistery of ATD on poverty. For me, surely, but also for the economy of Francesco. We are very happy then ATD will be present with your people, your young people in the event. Because the economy of Francesco estimates and evaluates poverty. And we believe that good poverty can cure bad poverty, because there are values in poverty unknown to most. And then I'm very happy to listen to you, because there are a treasure in your way of living and understanding poverty, and your distinction between poverty and misery, that are very important for me in order to reduce this poverty of language that is one of the poverty, the negative poverty of poor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bruni. And now, Jean Tomblé, the floor is yours. Thank you for sharing some remarks with us.
Yes, thank you, Luigino. I will be very short. A brief message. On Saturday, 17 October, next Saturday, as every year since 17 October 1987, we will celebrate the World Day to Overcome Extreme Poverty, created by Father Joseph Rezinski and officially recognized by the United Nations since 1992. The message of this day brings us together today. Wherever people are condemned to live in poverty, human rights are violated. To unite to ensure that they are respected is our sacred duty. Uniting, this is what we wanted to do by joining the dynamic launched by the economy of Francesco, and by proposing this webinar. Together, we can build another economy respectful of the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Together, we can build a world without misery. Together, yes, together, but all together, with the special and unique contribution of the men and women living in poverty, in whose school we must put ourselves. Thank you for allowing this webinar to take place today on the eve of the World Day to Overcome Extreme Poverty.
Thank you so much, Jean. And now it is really a great honor to leave the floor to our keynote speaker, Dr. Godinot. So we are really eager to listen to you. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for your invitation. I am very happy to be part of the webinar set up by the Economy of Francesco Collective, and I very much appreciate your efforts to associate young people from all walks of life. Youth is a time when important choices are made, and I decided to commit myself to combating poverty and injustice when I was a student. I had then the opportunity to meet, during summer camps, young people from very poor families who had been placed in foster care. This encounter with extreme poverty was a shock that gave a new direction to my life. I had the feeling that the young boys and girls I met were deprived of very important things I could enjoy, such as doing gut studies with the financial support of my parents. I felt I had to put the privilege of my education at the service of the fight against extreme poverty and injustice. This is why I've been involved since then in the international movement ATD Fourth World. Now I'm going to present one of the latest international undertakings of our movement, the research on the hidden dimensions of poverty that we designed and conducted with Oxford University. As you may know, the United Nations General Assembly adopted in 2015 17 Sustainable Development Goals and recognized that, I quote, eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, is the greatest global challenge and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development. Yet, the dimensions of poverty were not defined anywhere, and we thought it was indispensable to define them with people trapped in poverty who know best what poverty really is. This research was implemented in 6 countries, 3 from the global north, France, the UK, and the USA, and 3 from the global south, Bangladesh, Bolivia, and Tanzania. An international coordination team was run by 2 researchers from Oxford University, Professor Robert Walker and Dr. Rachel Bray, and 3 permanent volunteers from ATD Fourth World, including me. National research teams were set up in the 6 countries. Each comprised 9 to 15 members, 4 to 6 people with direct experience of poverty, and 2 to 4 academics and practitioners that provided services or advocacy for people in poverty. Experienced co-workers from ATD Fourth World supported people living in poverty in ways that enabled their full participation on equal footing with academics and practitioners through the merging of knowledge approach. In this approach, instead of being objects for research and policies designed by others, people in poverty are co-researchers whose intelligence contribute to a common endeavor. The research questions were, what is poverty and what are its characteristics? More than 1,000 people took part in this research, among which more than 600 people living in poverty and extreme poverty, who have combined their knowledge gained from life experience with the knowledge of practitioners gained through action and with academic knowledge gained through research. Through a process of multiple discussions at local and national level, the knowledge of each group has been challenged and combined with that of the other groups to yield a single set of poverty dimensions for each country. After this introduction on the goals and scope of our endeavor, the first part of my presentation will be a 7-minute extract from a film about the research. In the second part, I shall present the outcomes of the research. In a third part, I shall make a few remarks on the participatory process, and then I shall conclude. So first of all, extract from a film unveiling the hidden dimensions of poverty.
First stage of the project, finding the participants. Here, in Tanzania, we had to go looking for people living poverty in their workplaces. This unusual approach was well received by some, like Evelyn Anthony, a single mother who works several hours a day in this huge stone pit to be able to feed her 4 children. She accepted our invitation to participate in the research project because she was determined to share her experience with others, and we offered financial compensation for the time she would have been earning. It was throughout meetings like this one, among peers, that everybody began sharing their experience and thoughts.
We learn a lot about different issues related to poverty. After my father died, my mother went to her parents. This meant finding a new husband. This man rejected me. I was sent to my grandmother. But she was barely surviving on her own. We had no food. I went back to my mother and lived there for 3 years. And she forced me to get married.
Academics, what did you find make this life intolerable?
We decided that income is most important factor.
Now, the practitioners.
We found that negative perception is what makes life most difficult.
How about the men?
Peace. Without peace, there can be no work or business.
And the women?
Peace. Without peace, no work can be done. With peace and tranquility, you can do business and farm, you can do anything.
The same happened in Bangladesh. Here, on the riverbank, Lenan Rahman, director of the Mati Association, a local NGO, encountered some of the most excluded people in the region. These women are called the tiger widows because they have lost their husband to a lethal attack by this predator while gathering food and fuel for their families.
I really love to take part in this research program because we got the chance to express my feelings about how the poverty is affecting us. That's why we are very much happy. Previously, we never visited outside of our area. In this program, we have got the chance to take part in the mock session, which was really like a dream for us. We forgot the stress of 16 hours journey after completing this work.
After a few months, in each country, the encounters multiplied. In these images, we see people from France and Bolivia at work. During regular meetings, the participants exchange and reflect from their experiences. Different exercises enable them to describe and think about the characteristics and the dimensions of poverty.
Historians teach us that societies have been building up an ignorance of poverty for centuries. The awareness that we are trying to build with people living in poverty is disruptive and hardly acknowledged by the dominant ideology. We've achieved a rigorous scientific analysis that avoids manipulating people, demonstrating that we have a participation mechanism that is carefully built to release understanding and expression from below that takes shape little by little and then explodes and reveals itself. Some academics have been extremely sensitive to the originality of this. I'm thinking of those who are with us in this research and other academics.
At the very beginning, they were going too fast and we felt completely lost. And I thought, I can't do this, I don't understand, it goes too fast. Back at home, I said, no, we're actually going to tell them and maybe they'll slow down and it'll be easier for us.
I've come to realise that you can't know what poverty is unless you've lived it. And we who aren't poor, have never been poor, assume that we do know. We abuse, we challenge, we undermine, we stigmatise, we push people back So that's the most important thing, I guess.
When I first got involved in the projects, I knew it was going to be a lot of hard work. I've learned a lot of new things where seeing the whole range of diversity right across from the top of global north right down to the bottom of global south. In a lot of cases, the north and the south are quite similar. So my aim is to carry on with the fight.
Previously, we as academicians, we think that we know everything. But with this project, there's something that was very different. That I learned that the poor people are also very resourceful. So you learn from them, you know what they're doing, why they're doing, and then from that, you build whatever is new on that so that they can take off. So that is what the most important thing that I learned from them.
Eventually, the 71 dimensions of poverty were produced by 6 national research teams. These dimensions were merged during a long international merging of knowledge session. This process has led to the identification of 9 key dimensions of poverty that, despite big differences in the daily life of people across countries, are surprisingly similar. Please show the slide with the diagram and the dimensions of poverty. Thank you. The diagram shows 3 interdependent sets, each comprising 3 dimensions of poverty. The 3 dimensions that constitute the core experience of poverty, red circle and half circles at the center of the diagram, place the anguish and agency of people, and not a number of dollars, at the center of the conceptualization of poverty. The first one is disempowerment, a lack of control and dependency on others, resulting from severely constrained choices. A person in poverty from Bangladesh said, "Rich people can buy everything. They use their power to take everything a poor person deserves." The second dimension is suffering in body, mind, and heart. Living in poverty means experiencing intense physical, mental, and emotional suffering, accompanied by a sense of powerlessness to do anything about it. For example, when people are starving in the global south, or when they live in the streets in the global north. The third dimension is struggle and resistance. There is an ongoing struggle to survive, which includes resisting and counteracting the effects of the many forms of suffering brought by privations, abuse, and lack of recognition. The second set of dimension, privations, that you can see in the green polyhedrons to the right of the diagram, is more familiar. We have distinguished 3 kinds of privations. Lack of decent work, that refers to the experience of being denied access to work that is fairly paid, safe, secure, regulated, and dignified. Insufficient and insecure income, that refers to having too little income to be able to meet basic needs and social obligations, to keep harmony within the family, and to enjoy good living conditions. Material and social deprivation, that refers to a lack of access to adequate housing, health services, education, culture, goods and services that are necessary to live a decent life and participate fully in society. The third set of dimension is relational dynamics that you can see on the blue polyhedrons to the left of the diagram. 3 dimensions that are relational draw attention to the way that people who are not confronting poverty affect the lives of those who are poor. First of all, institutional maltreatment. It is a failure of national and international institutions through their action or inaction to respond appropriately and respectfully to the needs and circumstances of people in poverty, and thereby to ignore, humiliate, and harm them. Social maltreatment describes the way that people in poverty are negatively perceived and treated badly by other individuals and informal groups. A person in poverty from the UK said, "Poverty is being treated like cattle. You have no dignity and no identity." Unrecognized contributions. The knowledge and skills of people living in poverty are seldom seen, acknowledged, or valued. Often, individually and collectively, people experiencing poverty are wrongly presumed to be incompetent. While there are many indicators for deprivations, there are very few or none for the other 6 dimensions of poverty that are seldom considered in policy discussions. This is why we talk of the hidden dimensions of poverty. While every dimension is evident in all countries, each varies in form and degree according to 5 identified modifying factors. Location, that you can see in dark blue in the upper left part of the diagram with an arrow. Urban, peri-urban, or rural. Timing and duration, that you can see below. Short spell differing from long spells of poverty. Poverty experience in childhood or in old age, differing from that experience in working age. Cultural beliefs concerning, for example, whether poverty is thought to be caused by structural factors or by personal failings. Identity, that you can see in dark blue in the upper right part of the diagram, with discrimination on grounds such as ethnicity, gender, and sexual orientation, adding to that associated with poverty. And last but not least, environment and environmental policy, from climate change, soil degradation, pollution, to inadequate public infrastructure. Now I come to my third part, some short remarks on the participatory process of the research. First of all, there is a solid epistemological basis to our approach. The merging of knowledge approach has been described with other words by Amartya Sen, a Nobel Prize winner for economics and confirmed keynote speaker for the event at ATD in November 2020. Sen contends that subjective perceptions of individuals, when discussed and combined in many peer groups that are then merged, result in new collective knowledge with positional objectivity. When the positional objectivity of people living in poverty is cross-fertilized with that of practitioners and academics, it results in a new knowledge with transpositional objectivity that is more comprehensive and a better basis for policies and action. Second remark about participation, researchers used to distinguish between several degrees of participation in research projects. The lowest degree is consultation. Then there is collaboration. And at the top of the participation scale, control, when people who participate have a real control on the design, implementation, discussion, and dissemination of the result. There was a high degree of control on the research by all members of the national research teams, which required a huge investment of time with people experiencing poverty. Thirdly, such a participatory process has transformative effects on the people who implement it. As you have seen in the film, the attitude of academics who participated in the research has changed. Professor Robert Walker from Oxford University recognized that academics often misunderstand and abuse people living in poverty, while Professor Kitoyo Wetangere from Tanzania University discovered that these people are resourceful and must be part of the project to combat poverty. Likewise, practitioners and moreover people in poverty were empowered through this process, gaining pride and new capacities to analyze situations, to express themselves, to facilitate groups, to collaborate with others, etc. I do not want to take up more time so as to leave space for comments, questions, and answers. Let me conclude by saying that there is an urgent need to associate people living in poverty in efforts and actions for justice, peace, sustainable development that leaves no one behind, and the custody of creation. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much, Dr. Godinot, for your inspiring presentation, which highlights the importance of a participatory approach to poverty issues that really includes poor people as actors of change. And while you were speaking, I was thinking about the letter that Pope Francis has written to young economists and entrepreneurs worldwide when he invited them to the economy of Francesco, where he really encourages young people to design workshops of hope and to create new ways to understand the economy. And these new ways should really give voice to those who have none and be inspired by an ideal of fraternity that is attentive above all to the poor and the excluded. So I really believe that this is absolutely in line with your experience and studies, and that it can prove, it can become food for thought for our Economy of Francesco participants. So thank you very much for your insights. And now time has come for our Q&A session with our discussants from the Economy of Francesco participants. And so Marta, the floor is yours. You can ask your question to Dr. Godinot.
Okay, thank you, Loredana, and thank you very much, Dr. Godinot, about the insightful talk. I've come to know your work and report about a year and a half ago, and I have been really fascinated by your approach, by the effort that you put to actually put together, merge different points of view, different perspectives on such a complex question as what is poverty. And this is a question that has bothered me personally for a long time. On one hand, as an academic in the academic field, as I have never been really convinced that limiting our analysis first, and then also our recommendation to the lack of sufficient income, and even to the presence of other material deprivations, without, for instance, thinking about the actual inclusiveness of our economic system and our societies in general, can give us an exhaustive view of what does it mean to be poor in our societies. And this question, what is poverty, has also bothered me as someone who has worked for some years in the nonprofit sector. And in various occasions, I have been struck by my own unpreparedness, my own unawareness of some dimensions of poverty that I have come to meet, even in my own country, Bulgaria, that I thought I knew very well. And finally, this question of what is poverty has bothered me also as a person, individually, looking at my family, at my personal story, and recognizing that beyond all the fortune that I've had to be raised up in a relatively safe environment, also to study, to pursue my dreams, there were also parts, shades of my story that come out in, that impoverish it and come out in different occasions. So I guess it is quite banal to say that nobody's life is only good or only bad. Nobody's only rich and only poor, as Professor Bruni was saying in the beginning, because we are all rich of something and poor of something else. And so the nuanced view of poverty that you offer us, that you give in your report, really tells us about the incredible variety of experiences that can deprive a human life. Also, as the good life of a person can be so nuanced, can be so rich. So another point that really strikes me in your study is that you don't talk about poverty. This also was said in the beginning. Then you don't talk about poverty only in negative terms. as we are usually used to. But you highlight also the unrecognized contribution, the efforts, the resistance of who experiences it in person. As the professor from Tanzania from the video was saying, the poor people also have something to say. They're also resourceful. So becoming aware of this, as your merging of knowledge methodology shows us clearly, cannot be an abstract activity of the mind, an abstract idea, reflection, but can only be the fruit of a real encounter, of entering into dialogue and so doing, enriching each other's ideas and perspectives, and arrive at a view of poverty that does not belong to anyone separately. And given that we're here in Economia Francesco and listening about your approach, I can't help thinking about St. Francis' encounter with the leper. An encounter that came after many other missed encounters, many times in which the young Francis passed by without stopping, without looking at these men and women who were suffering at the margins of bedtime society. In fact, St. Francis had a fear, had a real disgust from the leper. Then one day, while riding his horse near Assisi, he actually, and for the first time, opened up himself to this real encounter. And despite the disgust that the disease, the leprosy, provoked in him, he got off the horse and kissed the leper. So when you talked about these transformative effects of the participatory process you have put into action, involving different actors that seldom meet and get to really know each other, I thought that neither St. Francis nor the leper came out of that encounter the same as they were before. For St. Francis, it was a way to discover that the grace of God was present even there, in that disease, in the wounds and the suffering of that man. In fact, in this testament later, he wrote that when he got used to the leper, what had previously provoked him disgust and nausea became the source of a spiritual and physical consolation for him. So this was a really radical change in his perceptions. And also, who knows what the encounter meant for the leper himself in a society where he was completely invisible. Maybe it was a moment of gaining awareness of the preciousness of his own life that deserved to be embraced as well and not just thrown away of the city walls. So coming to my question, and given that we are here in also to commemorate this World Day to overcome extreme poverty, I'd like to ask you, what does this encounter mean in terms also of the ways in which we attempt to fight to eradicate extreme poverty? What does being more aware of these hidden dimensions of poverty that you talked about, of the core experiences of poverty, as well as of these relational dynamics that underlie them, what does this mean in terms of the strategies that we put into action through our governments, through all the social actors that in different ways try to tackle poverty, and also about our engagement as citizens, as people, like individuals ourselves. So this would be my question, and thank you one more time for your talk.
Thank you very much for your questions and for your comments as well. Yes, what does this encounter with people living in extreme poverty mean for us as citizens and also for our collectivities? To meet people living in extreme poverty, we need to reach them. And you know that poverty often leads people to isolate, even to hide themselves. And so if we want to meet these people, we need to reach out to them. We need to go where they live, to go where they try to work, and try to have a real encounter with them on equal footing. And this is something which is quite difficult. As you underline in the encounter between St. Francis and the leper, at the very beginning, there is fear on both sides. There is fear on the side of St. Francis, and then there is fear on the side of the leper. And today it's the same. There is fear on the side of people who are well off, and there is fear on the side of people who are poor, extremely poor, because they have been so often discriminated, stigmatized, perceived negatively, etc. So the first step is to overcome our fears and to try to have a meeting on equal footing. And this is, you can do it in one-to-one meeting. It's also important to do it in collective meetings. Why is it important to have collective meetings? Because when people in poverty from several locations meet together, they discover that the hardships they suffer are shared by other people. And so the shame that they were bearing, little by little disappears. Because they can see that other people share the same hardships. And so being able to come together to meet people who respect them, little by little they will gain some pride. And even in the Fourth World movement, they gain the pride to become real recognized fighters against extreme poverty. So what does it mean at individual level? It means the effort to overcome our fear and to really go and meet people where they are and try to talk with them. Once more, trying to be on equal footing. At a collective level, it's a bit the same, because we have many policies that intend to reach the poor and don't do it. For example, during this time of pandemic, there were many cash transfer programs around the world, I think around 100 countries. Cash transfers, are meant to give money to people living in poverty who sometimes are starving. But many people who suffer from extreme poverty are not registered anywhere. Children are not registered at birth. Adults have no identity cards, etc. So when these people are not registered by local or national authorities, the policies that intend to reach them fail. And so you need, if you want to reach these people, you need to have kind of campaigns of registration to have them, in your data and be able to give them the cash transfer that are intended to reach them. So a topic in policies is the non-take-up of rights by people living in poverty. And the non-take-up of rights has several components. The first one is when you cannot reach people. And the second one is when people can be reached, but they feel that the policies that are implemented will put shame on them, will stigmatize them, and then they can, make a step back and not to be involved by these policies. So here are some elements to answer your question.
Thank you.
So Jean-Paul, the floor is yours. You can ask your question to Dr. Godinot.
Hello, Dr. Godinot. Once again, thank you for what you have shared in the last few minutes. I'd like to express deep gratitude, especially for your testimony, besides your work with the project research team, in order to produce this very important report and findings on the hidden dimensions of poverty. I believe that what you have accomplished together with all the stakeholders is a sign also of authentic solidarity, one that has a long-term view and that has universal validity, notwithstanding the challenges that you came across of bringing together people from different walks of life, from also different experiences, acknowledging that there is, of course, a wide gap between the global north and the global south in terms of deprivations lived. And I also appreciate this perspective of putting everyone on an equal footing, which you have done with great care and compassion. I imagine you have invested much time and perseverance with your team, and perhaps also encountered many attempts along the way to come up with this precious work. It is not mistakes or the difficulties do not get discounted, but rather add to the beauty and the validity of this body of work. Probably there are three things I would like to cite from my point of view on this achievement that you've done. One, I agree with Dr. Bruni's observation at the start, which I have myself noticed going through the different dimensions of poverty you have presented that have emerged. It is the value of language and the method, which in this participatory research has emerged to be one with a focus on equity. As a teacher, I presented this anecdote to my students from Amartya Sen, who likens development to a conversation between human beings. He was referring to the migration crisis in Europe, particularly on Greece, when he said that human conversation takes the form of one sentence against another. Human insecurity in Greece is intolerable. That's a statement that no amount of numbers, of calculating, of ranking will be able to replace or to substitute. And in fact, he says human conversation, rather than being a rich description, becomes instead something unvalued when you just replace them with numbers like that. No? So it's a mistake to compare them. So, and I also see, for example, I got very struck by this result as seen in the video that you showed and in the report itself, that those who are in direct experience of poverty have been referred to as activists, as a recognition and also a reaction to the negative perception of being poor is associated with. And this is something I think fundamentally important, even at the level of language and method. Another thing is that you have broadened the informational base by the focus of deprivation beyond real income, beyond utility or procedural liberty. These aspects that emerge, especially the relational aspects and the core experiences, I think are very important, as they are also intangible resources, intangibles that usually are overlooked. Usually we count only resources that are material, social, economic in our calculations of poverty. And then finally, I also would like to express that from a dialogical process perspective, this understanding of poverty and enabling development, or at least starting from letting those with direct experience in poverty present their own conceptualization of it, is something that's aligned with what Pope Francis has been sharing in his approach to viewing globalization, to employ a polyhedric model rather than a spherical one. In such a way, in fact, I noticed even the dimensions, some of the dimensions in your diagram are in fact this shape, polyhedrons. And this is important, as in this period of disruption and complexity, of great upheaval, in fact, of great suffering for all of us, we have to hear the voices that have not been heard, who are bearing the brunt of the wounds of society, precisely from the point of view of those who are directly experiencing these experiences of deprivation. I am a teacher, but as well a lay missionary and an educator. So I have been working a lot with young people. I was very moved by your own decision to pursue further studies and work for changing the situations of injustice and inequality at the start of your life. And I believe that it is important to stimulate spaces of active citizenship, of civic formation, of deep dialogue and cultural exchange, especially among young people now. So I would like to focus on this question now that you have presented these findings on the hidden dimensions. I would like to ask, one is, you've highlighted, in fact, also, as Marta mentioned, there's the unrecognized contributions of people in poverty that emerge. In my experience here in the Philippines, in our experience, we have this very strong value for resourcefulness, for resilience. In fact, for bearing suffering. It's a very strong Filipino trait. And sometimes this helps a lot to get us through. But at the same time, it is important in a process of participating and sharing one's real experiences in a global stage. We also have to really express these values at the same time to highlight that there are, in fact, deprivations behind them. So this giving of importance to positional objectivity, that the poor who are experts of their experience of poverty have to be shared. What now with this, with these findings of the importance of relational dynamics, also of the process that you did yourself that highlights proximity and reciprocity? Does this now allow us to be on the same page on a common project, whether we are countries from the global south or from the global north? This consensus and these common experiences now shared, do they allow us to further prolong our collaboration? And for the country level, what does this mean as well? These findings, what do they mean in terms of concrete social policies that we can pursue, especially now that there's a lot, in particular, on involuntary hunger, on the loss of jobs due to the economic recession, the global recession triggered by the pandemic. Are these findings, in your opinion, also very compelling for those actors, not only of the government, but private sector, private and public partnerships, to deliver on the economic facilities and social opportunities badly needed by the most vulnerable workers and the poor in society? Thank you.
Professor Godinot, Dr. Godinot, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thank you for your kind comments and for your questions. What does it mean at country level, this the outcomes of our research, and what does it mean for the private sector, for companies, etc.? You certainly noticed that we did not, in our research, try to give policy solutions to the issue of poverty. We had a huge work to do with 6 country national research teams, with many people, and we wanted to come to common outcomes, which we did. We didn't have time to work on policies. If we had tried to do it, we should have tried to do it at national level with each country, and then at the international level. And this would be quite another a new research project. But what I really think is that we have laid the basis to think of better policies for the public sector and for the private sector. Because as you have noticed, many of these dimensions of poverty, probably 6 out of 9, are rarely considered in policy discussions. And so what we are requesting is that this dimension be taken into account in policy reflection. When a government decides, for example, to to distribute cash transfer to people living in poverty, how are they going to do it? Are they thinking of the possible effects of stigmatization of people? Are they thinking of the shame that can be put of people if this cash transfer are distributed in a bad manner? Are they thinking of the suffering that it can that people who will receive the cash transfer are bearing? As you rightly mentioned, you mentioned that people bear the suffering, especially in your country, but in many other countries, they bear the suffering, and they are profoundly affected by this suffering, and so they can, when they are going to receive cash transfer, they can be cautious, even reluctant to ask for the transfer because of the fear of being once more ashamed, being once more negatively perceived, being once more blamed, and this must be taken into account by governments when they implement policies. Of course, this should be taken into account also by the private sector in the same way. When you employ people in factories, how do you treat them? Is it decent work? Is it work with good wages, or are people exploited? Are they treated like slaves? And so I think this, once more, I think these dimensions lay a ground to think better policies at all levels, public policies, private policies, actions for NGOs. We as an NGO, we need also to take into account all these dimensions. We need to make visible the recognized contributions of people living in poverty. We need to make them visible at local, national, and international level. So I don't know if I answered completely your question. May I say one more word I am thinking back of the question of your colleague Marta. And when we want to reach out to people living in poverty, remember that it takes time. This is very important. It takes time. If you want to have a real encounter with people living in poverty, sometimes you have to meet them once, twice, 3 times, 4 times before a real equal footing occurs. And so if you are not ready to invest time, please, it's better to do nothing, because you're going to do bad things. You need to invest time if you want to reach out to the poorest people and to associate with us in actions.
So thank you so much, Dr. Godinot, and thank you also to our discussants for this very constructive and deep conversation. And unfortunately, we ran out of time. So
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much.
And I will leave the floor to Professor Bruni for final remarks. Thank you.
No, I'm just to say thank you very much for this very insightful and profound ideas and facts that are together very important for our process. We need ATD. We need your magistery, your knowledge, your intelligence because as you can imagine, the economy of Francesco without a deep reflection on poverty is impossible, because the economy of Francesco, if we use this very demanding name Francesco and not just economy responsible or social or what you want, the poverty, a reflection, deeper, charismatic reflection, poverty is essential. And then your friendship, your collaboration is an essential part of our process for now, for November in Assisi, and for the future. Then I'm very glad. I also thank you to Marta, to Manuel for this also interesting comments and questions. And thank you for all the participants in the web that are very, very numerous. And see you soon in November in Assisi for the celebration of our first year and a half actually of process. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, Jan. Thank you both.
Thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.